What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Justin Lorber, a.k.a. Future Dodgers, who is here to talk about the Rule 5 draft. Tomorrow, Friday, November 19th, is the deadline for the Dodgers to add some guys to their 40-man roster if they want to protect them. So, Justin, before we get into some names, off-season, how we doing?
It's moving quicker than I expected. I don't have all of my off-season content done. So if I had known it would have moved quicker, I might have moved quicker myself.
Fair. Well, I know you got your piece up last night, FutureDodgers.com, that is going to sort of go way more in depth on some of this stuff than we will. But before we talk, let me give a quick overview of the situation. The Dodgers, obviously, a 40-man roster, has 40 spots on it. The Dodgers, currently 37 of those 40 spots are taken. The reason for that is all of the guys who are on the 60-day IL have now been added back to the 40-man roster. That list, for context, does include Trevor Bauer, who many expect not to ever pitch for the Dodgers, but he is still on the 40-man roster. It does include some potentially expendable guys who we're not going to talk a ton about in this video, but we will in a future one. Andrew Vasquez, Darian Nunez, Rex, Rayleigh, McKinney. Whether those guys stay long-term will be another conversation. It also does not include the 10 or 11 free agents that the Dodgers currently have out there. So Seager, Taylor, Jansen, Pujols, Knebel, Kelly, Scherzer, Kershaw, etc., etc., etc. None of those guys are on here. So if you want the Dodgers to sign Chris Taylor, Clayton Kershaw, Max Scherzer, and Corey Seager, well, that's 4, and they've only got 3 spots. So just for context there. Again, November 19th is the deadline. The draft itself, December 9th. And so in order for the Dodgers to protect someone from the draft, they've got to be on the 40-man roster. As far as eligibility, I'll keep it simple here. If you sign at 19 or older, it's after 4 professional seasons. If you sign at 18 or younger, it's after 5 professional seasons. Again, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of what that looks like, Justin does a great job of his piece in doing that. We won't get into that there. So the Dodgers have 49 guys who are eligible for this draft. Almost all. A lot of those guys have no chance of being selected. So what we're going to talk about is the 6 guys, Justin, that you identified as kind of the legit contenders for being added. And again, if a guy gets picked by another team, they have to stay on their active roster for the entire season. So we'll just go through these, and then if you've got other names to add, we can get to those. But the first guy on your list, and this is not in any particular order, I want you to either make a case for why this guy should be kept or why he should be protected or why he should not be protected. The first one is Eddie's Leonard. Tell us a little bit about him and how you think his fate might be decided in this decision.
So if there is a breakout offensive prospect in the Dodger system this past season, I think there's a really good argument for it being Eddie's Leonard. He had a great year, spent the majority of the year at low A, but went up to high A at just right after the second half passed. So not quite a half season at high A, but just a little less. And he was phenomenal at both stops. Showed power. He played shortstop. He played second base. He played third base.
Wow.
He played center field. Decent walk rate, not a huge strikeout rate, especially for a 20-year-old playing below the league average age at both levels. So very, very impressive year. You can make an argument that he's the best overall prospect available on this list who could be protected. And now the downside is he is pretty far away. He's 20 years old. He'll be 21 next year, and he's only played at high A for less than half a season. So similar to Jorbit Vivas, who's another guy we'll talk about, a team that takes one of those 2 guys has to leave them on their major league roster for an entire season. And it's easier to do that with a very talented pitcher who you can put in low leverage situations so you can get bullpens on the side. A lot harder to do that with a hitter. Benches are shorter. You can't necessarily hide those guys as well. You'd basically be down a bench spot for an entire season, and it wouldn't be great for their development either. These are guys who either should be going back to high A next year or starting at double A. Nowhere close to the major leagues. They're probably 2 or so years away. So in that regard, I'm not sure a major league team would take the shot on them, but they're both very talented, and that's why they're both mentioned
now,
there.
2 questions to follow up quickly. How rare is it for a guy who hasn't played above high A to get selected? I mean, is that does that ever happen? A guy who's never played above high A getting selected in the Rule 5 draft?
So there was a guy, I don't know exactly what exactly where he played in the minor leagues before he was selected, but Elvis Luciano, believe he was taken by the Blue Jays a few years ago. And there was some loophole. He was like 19 or 20 when he got taken, and they threw him in like low leverage outings. He spent the maximum time on the injured list, which I believe is 90 days for a Rule 5 draft pick, unless they have like Tommy John or something, in which case the requirements that they spend the whole year on the active roster just move to the next season if they're out that year. So I don't know, and especially with a hitter, it's really hard to imagine. I don't know. I don't think a team would do it, but I can't say conclusively that.
Yeah, because again, part of this for folks watching, this isn't just about, hey, protect the best 6 guys that you have, because part of this is a risk tolerance thing where you only have so many 40-man roster spots. We know the Dodgers value those heavily in an organization that prides itself on depth, that prides itself on being able to pick up the Phil Bickfords and the Evan Phillips of the world. And so part of this is, once you add them to the 40-man roster, they cannot be taken off without basically being cut. And so part of it is, will this guy actually get picked? Last question on Leonard, you mentioned. So you, in your sort of next version of prospect rankings, he would be the highest ranked player on this list. Do you have a sense of like, I mean, is he going to be a top 10 guy in the organization after the year he just had?
Him and Vivas, I think, are borderline top 10, if not within the top 10 right now. For me, at least. I don't know if that's a universal ranking, but both had phenomenal years. Both did very well at ages well below the league average at both levels. And both play somewhat premium positions. Vivas is second baseman and third baseman, but Leonard plays shortstop, second base, third base, and center field, all important defensive positions.
And we'll end each of these with a quick, would you protect this player, and do you think the Dodgers protect this player? So on Leonard, would you protect him / do you think the Dodgers will protect him?
I would lean yes, but I don't think he will be. I think they will, both him and Vivas, who we can talk a little bit more in depth about. I think both of them will be left off. And, you just hope that a team doesn't take the shot.
Go to Vivas. This is a guy that you love. This is a guy that you have kind of been on. I know. We've had conversations, and I had not heard of him before conversations with you. Now we're here. So Jorbit Vivas, tell us a little bit about him and make the case for, as you said, you would sort of advocate for not keeping him and kind of taking your chances, but it's not a reflection of his prospect status or his long-term potential.
Yeah, well, the kid just hits. He's always been a great, hit for contact type of guy. He added about 35 pounds between 2019 and 2021, which allowed him to hit for some more power. He does not strike out very often. His strikeout rate and swinging strike rate are among the lowest in the Dodgers system, at least at single A through triple A. And yeah, I mean, he's just a really good hitter, explosive back speed, great contact skills. So I think you probably don't protect him with the idea that is a major league team really going to take a guy who has a month of high A experience and will be 21 next year and leave them on their major league roster for the whole season? I think probably not. I think you probably wait a year because these aren't even guys who aren't even certain to start at Double A. They could head back to High A, and as I mentioned, with hitters, it's hard to hide.
Yeah, it's always fascinating because you think of a team like the Rockies who are basically going nowhere fast. And it's like, if you know you're going to tank, like, is it worth it to try and just sort of stockpile? And obviously, when I say stockpile, you can't really stockpile because you've only got 26 spots on your active roster. But do you take a flyer on a guy and say, who cares about the last spot on our bench? It doesn't really matter. We're just going to press pause on this guy's development for a year and hope that he develops into a top 100 type prospect down the road. It's a fascinating conversation, but again, we're just focusing on the Dodgers. There's probably, 50 other guys across the league that other teams might describe in similar terms of like, hey, he's only been in High A, so it's a fascinating decision. So you would once again say you don't think he's going to be protected, and you would not protect him on Vivas. Okay.
No.
But you would protect Leonard. Correct me. You would protect Leonard?
I would. I think Leonard's a little more valuable because of the defensive versatility and the positions he plays. And I think he would be just slightly more at risk because he did get a little more high A exposure than Vivas.
Okay, so speaking of positional value here, Jacob Amaya is the next guy on this little list, again, which is not in order. But Jacob Amaya was eligible to be taken last year as well. Is that correct? And no, he was not.
No, this is his first year.
So talk me through Amaya.
So I think if you were making this ranking a year ago, he would have been at the top of the list, and he wouldn't have necessarily been a lock, but he would have been
Okay.
close to it. Uh, he had his first year at Double A. Didn't perform like he had in previous stops. Previous stops, high contact, very high walk rate. Walk rate went down, strikeouts went up. He did hit for more power, and he's a really good defensive shortstop. He's a guy who can probably play either middle infield position in the future. So I think if the Dodgers are high internally on the bat, or at least high enough, he's a guy he will get protected. I think he probably has the second best odds of getting
Okay.
protected out of this group behind James Outman. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him get added to the 40-man tomorrow.
Because for him it's upside on defense. Like it's a competent middle infield glove that you would trust at the major league level today. The question is just he struggled so bad offensively even at the minor league levels. Is can he even get to a place of offensive? Is that a fair sort of summary on Amaya?
I wouldn't even say he struggled that poorly. The transition from high A to double A is considered the largest jump in the
Okay.
minor leagues. And in 2019, he didn't spend a whole year at high A. He got there towards the end of the season, maybe about a month of games, if I'm remembering correctly. And then he jumped to double A without the season last year. I don't remember if he was at the alternate site. I'm not quite sure about that. But I don't think you can read into his performance and be like, oh, well, the bat sucks. It does. I just, again, I wonder whether a major league team would take a shot at a guy like that and leave him on their major league roster. But because of the defensive value, I do think there's a really good shot he gets at it.
So your prediction is you would not add him, but the Dodgers you think might?
I think, and like you said, there are limited spots here. You have 3 spots if you don't DFA anyone. And in my thought exercise, I wasn't. So you have 3 spots. I ultimately would probably pick 2, maybe 3 guys for the 40-man. And I had Amaya 4th, but the gaps are not very large, and I think there's a reasonable argument for any of these guys. I could certainly be convinced to add any of these guys.
Well, the next guy I know is a guy you like. It's a guy that is sort of, I don't know if skyrocketing is the right word, but rising quickly up prospect boards. This is a guy that we saw in spring training last year, so it's a name the Dodgers fans might be familiar with. That's James Outman, playing some center field, got great hair, 10 out of 10 on the hair scale. But looked the part defensively in spring training last year. But I was like, I haven't heard of this guy. Maybe they just like his glove and needed some bodies. But he tore it up. He's in the Arizona Fall League, played in the All-Star game. So talk to me about James Outman.
Out of all these guys, I think Outman's at the greatest risk for selection if he doesn't get protected. He had a really good year, starting the year at high A, got bumped up to double A, where he hit just as good, if not better, at double A compared to high A. And great defense at all 3 outfield positions, has some speed. I think, if a team thinks there is a starter level outfield bat quality there, I think, they could definitely take a shot and add him to the 40-man and say, well, he hasn't seen AAA yet, but we really like him. He can play some defense. We can get him in there as a bench bat. And then maybe the next year after, he'll be ready for the major leagues. So I think he's at the greatest risk to be selected, and that's why he's my top choice for protection.
Now, what's interesting is the Dodgers do have a backlog of outfielders on their 40-man roster. They've got Luke Raley, they've got Zach Rex, they've got Billy McKinney, and then you factor in other guys who have played some outfield like Sheldon Noisy, etc. How does Outman stack up? I mean, if we're looking at 2022, is there a chance that he could be kind of a rotational major league outfielder on a team like the Dodgers?
I think he probably heads to AAA first, but there's certainly a chance, especially when you consider that those guys you mentioned, Raley, Rex, and McKinney, they're all corner outfielders. In terms of center fielders, with Chris Taylor currently being a free agent, the Dodgers have
Gavin Lutz, baby.
Maybe Gavin Lutz. I legitimately think Gavin Lutz could play center field. I think people who are down on that possibility because he was essentially forced into the position of playoff atmosphere are really just.
I'm glad we're aligned on this one, Justin. I feel like I am on an island where I'm sitting here and saying this isn't all that different with what they did with Bellinger. Like, they just took an unbelievable athlete and asked him to play a position he had never played before. And Lux, we just had to see what the first 2 weeks of it looked like, whereas Bellinger, we didn't. Like, Bellinger, the first time we were seeing him was not in the playoffs of, like, must-win games. So I'm not saying Lux is going to become Bellinger, but I am with you in that I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Lux is going to become above average defensively as a center fielder or even a left fielder. So anyways, I interrupted you, but this is encouraging to hear that I'm not on this island all by myself.
No, not at all. I've thought that for a couple of years, that he would be valuable with his athleticism, at least playing some outfield. But if Gavin Lux is not an outfielder, which right now he isn't, right now he'd probably be the starting second baseman. If you need a center fielder, you have Bellinger, you have Betts, maybe AJ Pollock, but they haven't played him a whole lot in center in the last couple of years. So James Outman provides something different than those other prospects. And, well, Billy McKinney's not a prospect, but just guys on the 40-man do. And I think that's another reason that would benefit or that would trend towards him.
Andrew Friedman might take offense to the claim that Billy McKinney is not a prospect. I just want you to know that, Justin, okay?
He doesn't have any option years left.
So would you, if Outman meant giving up on Rex or Rayleigh or one of those other guys, you would be comfortable doing that?
I would say probably. If it's, like a straight 1-for-1, like we have one spot, who do you give it to? Outman has the extra option year, more defensive value, younger than both of those guys.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. We did Vivas. Michael Grove is next on this list. This is a guy I'm partial to. He came on our show last spring training. Seems like a great dude. Former second-round pick, 2018, I believe. So 2018 second-round pick feels like a slam dunk. Well, of course you're protecting that guy. The numbers have not been kind to him, but there is some optimism, I know from you and some other folks, that some tweaks he made at the end of the year might be unlocking kind of what everybody has hoped for. So the numbers are not pretty, but talk to me about Michael Grove.
Yeah, the numbers are not pretty. If you look, I think his ERA is in the sevens,
like high
for
sevens
the year.
too.
Yeah, but he did make some mechanical adjustments. Josh Thomas, who writes for Dodgers Digest, has been on those all year, and he picked it up basically right when it happened and has been following him since, or following that transition since. And after, I believe it was July 31st, he started pitching a lot better. And with Grove, he still has really good stuff, especially for a starter. He's got 3 pitches, a fastball gets swings and misses in the zone, 2 solid breaking balls. So with Grove, you're buying this stuff, and you hope that he figures out the command. And even if he doesn't, the stuff is good enough to be a reliever. So I don't think, even though it'd probably look weird for a team to take a guy who had an ERA in the sevens in Double-A and put him on their major league roster for an entire season, I do think the stuff is good enough to be in a major league role. Whether the command will allow him to get there is kind of the big question mark.
Would you protect him?
I had him third, so if you're protecting 3 guys or using all 3 spots, I would. If you're only doing 2, I wouldn't necessarily. But again, the differences in these spots are really tiny. I think, if I were to look back at it in a week, I might flip a name or 2. So yeah, there's a good argument.
And doing the same sort of exercise with Outman briefly, I mean, looking at him alongside a guy like Mitch White, who's on the back end of the 40-man roster as a starting pitcher, how would you sort of navigate that one? I mean, is White clearly the guy that you would keep in that, or is the stuff with Grove give you a higher ceiling to the point of if you had to choose between those two, you'd think hard about it?
I think there's at least 5, 6, 7, 8 guys who I would take off the 40-man before Mitch White. I really like Mitch White. I think he probably deserves a shot to be a major league starter and compete for a rotation spot. I don't know if he'll get that with the Dodgers, which is unfortunate. But I think the way he pitched last year in both relief and in the rotation or in bulk outings, he has earned a chance to at least compete for a starting spot.
Yeah, and White's probably the bad example considering the Dodgers only have like 5 starting pitchers maybe total on their 40-man roster right now. And so, just thinking about if guys that were maybe in that same mold of starter primarily, but relief pitcher. But I agree with you. From a relief pitcher side, there's definitely other guys I would go for first. Okay, last one, Guillermo Zuniga. Again, this is a name that would be unfamiliar to many people. He was not at the top of many prospect lists at the beginning of the season, at the midway point of most seasons. But talk to me why he's on this list of 6 guys that you think have a chance of being added to the Dodgers / at risk for other teams.
Well, you're not going to see a lot of reliever prospects very high on prospect lists because their value is pretty limited. But that being said, those probable relievers are a lot of times the guys who do get taken in the Rule 5 draft. You look at last year, Brett DeGeis and Jordan Sheffield, 2 reliever prospects, both got taken. So those kind of guys are the ones who are generally more at risk. Because like I said, you can hide those guys in a bullpen, throw them in low leverage outings, and then if it works out, great. You have a solid reliever who you have under team control for 6 seasons. If it doesn't work out, you just give him back to the original team. You don't lose very much. So Zuniga, mid to upper 90s fastball with a plus slider. He's big. He's like 6'5". So he's on there because he's the kind of guy who could get selected. I don't know if he necessarily will be, but of the pure reliever prospects in the system who are eligible for the Rule 5 draft, I think he's the best of them.
And so asking a similar question, I sense that you don't think you would not protect him and you don't believe the Dodgers will protect him. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And how does he compare? I mean, because again, there are some guys on the back end of the 40-man roster from a relief pitcher perspective. No offense to Andrew Vasquez. I keep mentioning his name as a guy who appeared like 2 or 3 times and that was it. I mean, are there guys on the back end that you like Zuniga better than? Like that you would, if needed, you would rather cut that guy and keep Zuniga around, or you think take your chances that he doesn't get taken and sort of save the 40-man roster spot for somebody else?
I think if you're giving me one spot and you tell me it's either Zuniga or Vasquez, I probably take Zuniga because the ceiling is much higher. But that's not the world we live in, so I don't know if they'll. Yeah, and I mean, Zuniga might not be ready for major league appearances, and Vasquez might, even if the ceiling is lower, right? So the floor right now might be higher. Okay, those are the 6. You've got Leonard and Outman, I believe, at the top of your list, and you said Grove would be 3rd. Is that right? Okay, that's
and
right.
Then Vivas would be 4th, Amaya 5th, and Zuniga 6th?
Swap Amaya and Vivas. I had Amaya 4th.
Okay.
And I do think there's probably, within those 6, there's probably the top 4 are like a little bit of a tier above.
Now,
but not a very big tier.
And quickly before we go, other names. I know there are other names. You mentioned there's a guy who some people seem to believe might get protected, might get taken, and they are not in your 6. So talk me through some other names on this on that are eligible for the Rule 5 draft who the Dodgers might think of keeping or other teams might think of grabbing.
Yeah, I think Leonel Valera is someone who has been mentioned as a possible addition. He's on quite a few prospect lists. He had a big first half at high A, not a great second half, 54 weighted runs created plus, and a 40% strikeout rate.
Not ideal.
From August or the end of the year. He's still young. He just turned 22 years old. He'll be 22 at the start of next season. A really good defensive shortstop, power, speed profile, but there's a lot of swing and miss in there. And I think if you were going to add a high A infielder, I liked Vivas and I liked Leonard considerably better than I liked Valera. So I personally wouldn't add Valera. I would be a little surprised to see him added because for the same argument, this is a guy who's maybe a little bit more ready for Double-A than Leonard and Vivas, but not someone who's ready for the major leagues probably for 2 years. And I think if a major league team decides to add him and leave him on their active roster for the entire season, I think you kind of just put your hands up and be like, all right, well, and with the chance that just these guys can always get offered back. Connor Joe a couple years ago got taken in the Rule 5 draft. People might remember him. He's now on the Rockies. He played a few games against the Dodgers. He was in the Dodgers system, was taken in the Rule 5 draft, believed by the Reds, was traded to the Giants, and then after not too long, was offered back to the Dodgers. So sometimes these guys do get offered back. So even if they get taken, it doesn't mean they're
Fair,
gone forever.
fair. Okay, and any other names?
Uh, Ryan
Okay.
Noda
Yep.
might be one. He had 29 homers at Double-A. He was the second piece in the Ross Stripling trade. The only reason I think maybe not is because they have a couple corner outfield bats, like we talked about with Rex and Rayleigh, also on the 40-man, who do similar things, who might fill a similar role. If there's a surprise guy, I think it would be Drew Avens. He was a 33rd round pick, just like Zach McKinstry back in 2018. He's hit at basically every minor league stop, not as well as McKinstry did, but above average line in AAA last year as a 25-year-old. Play all three outfield positions, has some speed, high walk rate. So if there's like an out of nowhere pick, I think it would be Drew Avens, but I'm not going to go out on a limb and predict that.
Well, there you have it. Hey, if you want more info on this, like I said, Justin's got stuff up at futuredodgers.com. Way more in-depth, more breakdowns on individual players, and we kind of highlighted 6 or 7. He's got about 20 that are highlighted in his piece, so make sure to check that out. Justin, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the rest of your offseason.